Water car, a car that runs on water. Billionaires bought it and buried it so no one would ever drive it. You probably saw that headline on late-night feeds or shared it with a friend. Here is the version you know. An inventor rigs a small sedan to extract hydrogen from water on the fly. He drives it across the country on a pint of tap water. Investors show up. A deal is signed. The prototype disappears. It makes for instant outrage. It also makes for sloppy history. The most famous modern claim belongs to an inventor named Stanley Meyer. In the 1980s and 90s, Meyer went on local news and he did demonstrations. He sold franchises and he filed patents. He also faced lawsuits. Court records show that independent expert testing failed to verify a machine that produced more energy than it consumed. In 1996, a court ruled fraud in a civil case. That does not stop the story from spreading. It does not stop people from asking an important question. If a working water car existed, who would benefit from burying it? There are two answers. One is profit. Oil and automotive incumbents have incentive to slow technologies that threaten markets. The other is technical reality. Many claims violate conservation of energy. Scientists who have tested alleged devices repeatedly find measurement errors and hidden fuel sources. The real lesson is not that every buried invention is true. The real lesson is that powerful money and poor controls can look like a cover-up. But the water car is only the warm-up. A more dangerous and ambiguous case follows. A tower meant to light cities without wires vanished when a financier walked away. That story is Tesla and Wardenclyffe. Next, we dig into ledgers, letters, and blueprints that reveal what really happened in the early 1900s. Wardenclyffe Tower. A tower meant to light cities without wires rose on a Long Island beach and then vanished. Nikola Tesla called Wardenclyffe his great experiment. He filed patents for wireless transmission in the year 1900. J.P. Morgan funded the first stage. The tower began in 1901. The plan was audacious. Send power through the earth and the air. Let lights glow without wires and payments at the meter. The story that follows is part inspiration and part ledger. Tesla was a visionary. He published bold claims, and he designed enormous coils and tuning systems. He also needed money. Morgan expected profit and clarity. Progress stalled when costs climbed and experiments required more cash than anyone predicted. By about 1905, Morgan quietly stopped financing new work. Wardenclyffe fell into arrears. The tower stood incomplete for years. In 1917, the structure came down, and the property was sold to satisfy debts. That sequence is documented in correspondence and property records. It tells us the obvious. Revolutionary prototypes require sustained capital. It also tells us something deeper. Wireless power threatened a business model built on meters and wires. Power companies and investors preferred certainty. Scholars who have studied the archives, including Mark J. Cypher and others, find no smoking gun that proves a deliberate corporate conspiracy to bury the invention. They do find a pattern. When visionary engineering collides with hard costs and incumbent markets, the dream often dies on the books. So what remains is a haunting image. A tower that promised a different future, dismantled by finance and feasibility. The lesson is simple and unpleasant. Money decides what is built and what stays on the drawing board. Early electric cars. Electric cars once outsold gasoline cars. You probably think that is a recent surprise. It is not. At the turn of the last century, electric vehicles were prized in cities. They were quiet. They did not need hand cranks. Wealthy women and urban professionals liked them because they were easy to use. By 1900, electric cars accounted for about 1/3 of all vehicles on American streets. Then things changed fast. Henry Ford perfected mass production with the Model T in 1908. Cars became cheaper. The discovery of abundant Texas crude pushed gasoline prices down. Then, in 1912, the electric starter removed the last stubborn advantage of electric cars. Gasoline vehicles became easier to drive, and they suddenly offered longer range. That set of technical and market shifts explains much. Historians such as James J. Flink and David Kirsch emphasize infrastructure and economics over a single conspiracy. Roads were built for longer trips. Fueling stations and service networks expanded to serve internal combustion engines. Batteries were heavy and expensive. Range anxiety was real. Still, the story is not purely neutral. Corporations made choices that mattered. Oil firms invested in distribution and lobbying. Automotive companies prioritized engines and fueling networks that matched their factories and suppliers. General Motors and other large firms bought smaller electric outfits. In 1910, an important electric vehicle company changed hands. Corporate restructuring and consolidation redirected investment. Legal battles and patent strategies also shaped the field. Broad patents and cross-licensing raised costs for new entrants. Media campaigns framed gasoline as modern and powerful. The cumulative effect was a market that rewarded one technological path. So what do we learn so far? Technology is not chosen by science alone. It is steered by cost, by infrastructure, and by decisions made in boardrooms. Sometimes those decisions lock in a single future. Next, we will dig into a plant that threatened paper fortunes and sparked a moral panic that lasted generations. Hemp and industrial cannabis. Picture a field in the 1930s. Tall stalks sway in morning light. Farmers have grown this crop for rope and paper and cloth for centuries. Then the headlines change. Newspapers scream about danger and addiction. Within a decade, the plant becomes contraband. The story begins with utility. Hemp fiber was used for sails and rope since colonial times. It made durable textiles and strong paper. George Washington grew it. Thomas Jefferson grew it. Industrial processing improved in the early 20th century. New machines could strip fiber efficiently. That created opportunity. It also created threat. William Randolph Hearst owned vast timber holdings that supplied his paper mills. DuPont had invested heavily in synthetic fibers like nylon. Both had financial incentive to suppress a cheap, natural competitor. Hearst's newspapers ran sensational stories linking cannabis to crime and moral decay. The coverage was relentless and racially charged. It painted the plant as a menace. Harry Anslinger led the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He built his career on prohibition. Congressional hearings in 1937 led to the Marijuana Tax Act. The law did not ban hemp outright. It imposed regulations and taxes so burdensome that farmers and manufacturers abandoned the crop. Medical and industrial uses collapsed. The American Medical Association objected. Their testimony was ignored. Scholars who have studied the legislative record note the lack of scientific evidence presented. Decisions were driven by testimony that emphasized fear and anecdote. Corporate interests shaped policy, but they did not act alone. Cultural panic and political ambition played roles. During World War II, the government briefly reversed course. The Hemp for Victory campaign encouraged farmers to grow hemp for military supplies. After the war, the prohibition returned. So was hemp buried by billionaires. The evidence is mixed. Economic interests influenced prohibition. Hearst and DuPont stood to gain. But the mechanism was cultural and legislative, more than a single backroom deal. The lesson is clear. When a technology threatens established profit, the response is often regulatory. Markets get shaped by laws, and those laws get shaped by money and fear. Next, we turn to an energy source that promised to free humanity from fuel, but was left in the shadows for decades. Early solar technology. Sunlight is free. It falls on every roof and field. Harnessing it should have been obvious. Yet for most of the 20th century, solar power remained a curiosity. The question is why? The science was not secret. In 1839, a French physicist named Alexandre Edmond Becquerel discovered the photovoltaic effect. By the 1870s, inventors were building rudimentary solar devices. In 1954, Bell Labs created the first practical silicon solar cell. It converted sunlight to electricity at 6% efficiency. The New York Times called it the beginning of a new era. Then the era stalled. Oil was abundant and cheap. Petroleum companies had built global supply chains and political influence. Governments subsidized fossil fuel extraction and infrastructure. Utilities designed grids around centralized coal and gas plants. Solar required different thinking, distributed generation, storage solutions, new grid designs. Those changes threatened business models. Power companies earned returns on large capital investments. Rooftop solar bypassed the meter. So what happened? Research continued, but funding was modest. Oil crises in the 1970s sparked brief interest. Federal programs supported solar development. Then oil prices dropped. Political priorities shifted. Subsidies were cut. In the 1980s, the Reagan administration reduced renewable energy budgets and removed solar panels from the White House roof. That was symbolic and practical. Corporations did not bury solar in a vault. They simply declined to invest at scale. Utility lobbyists shaped regulations that favored incumbents. Tax structures and grid access rules made solar expensive for consumers. The result was decades of delay. Recent scholarship and industry reports show that solar technology could have been deployed much earlier. The barriers were not technical, they were financial and political. So the story of solar is not a conspiracy. It is a case study in path dependence. Infrastructure and institutions built around one energy source resist alternatives. When billions are sunk into coal plants and pipelines, the incentive is to recover those investments. Solar represents risk and disruption. The lesson repeats. Markets do not choose the best technology. They choose the technology that fits existing power structures. Next, we dive beneath the waves, where an ancient artifact reveals a loss that no billionaire caused, but that teaches the same hard truth. Antikythera mechanism. Imagine divers working off a Greek island in 1900. They pull bronze fragments from a shipwreck 2,000 years old. At first, the pieces look like corroded scrap. Then, someone notices gears. The Antikythera mechanism is the most sophisticated artifact of the ancient world. It is a device with dozens of interlocking gears that calculated astronomical positions and predicted eclipses. X-ray imaging and modern analysis reveal craftsmanship that would not appear again for over a millennium. The mechanism was built around 100 BC. It used differential gears and a complex gear train. Inscriptions name celestial bodies and calendar cycles. Historians call it an ancient computer. So how was this lost? The ship that carried it sank. The device went to the bottom of the sea. Knowledge traveled slowly in the ancient world. If only a few craftsmen knew the techniques and their workshops were destroyed, the skill could vanish. Wars disrupted trade. The Roman Empire eventually collapsed. Libraries burned. Technical knowledge that depended on rare expertise and specific tools could disappear in a single generation. Modern researchers have tried to reconstruct how it worked. They find evidence of advanced metalworking and precise mechanical understanding. The makers knew astronomy and mathematics. They built something extraordinary, then history erased it. This is a different kind of burial. No corporate conspiracy suppressed the Antikythera mechanism. Time and catastrophe did. Shipwrecks and wars are democracy's opposite. They erase without asking permission. But the lesson connects to the other stories. Concentrated knowledge is fragile. When expertise lives in a few hands and those hands are lost, progress stops. The mechanism shows what humanity was capable of in the ancient world. It also shows how easily that capability can be forgotten. Next, We cross from bronze gears to stone and water, where Romans built wonders that modern engineers still struggle to match. Roman concrete. Imagine kneeling in a Roman harbor at dawn. Salt wind bites your face. Workers shove small rocks into wet mortar, and a ship creaks as it unloads volcanic ash from a nearby island. That ash, called pozzolana by the Romans, is the secret ingredient. Mixed with lime and rubble, it makes a concrete that sets underwater and strengthens with time. Roman concrete is not a single recipe. It is a craft woven into trade routes and imperial logistics. Vitruvius, the Roman architect, wrote recipes centuries ago that survived in manuscripts. Archaeologists digging at harbors and piers find the telltale aggregate and glassy microstructures that modern labs now analyze. The Pantheon Dome still stands after nearly 2,000 years because the Romans matched volcanic ash to local lime and carefully graded the mix. Harbors that used Roman concrete resisted waves that shredded modern pores. Then, history disrupts everything. Trade routes fray, economies collapse, skilled workers die or move. The knowledge of sourcing the right ash and mixing at the right temperature diffuses away. For centuries, the method vanishes from practical use. Builders still used mortar, but the precise chemistry that made Roman marine concrete miraculous was lost. Centuries later, scientists hold samples under electron microscopes and lean over X-ray scans. In a fluorescent lab, a materials scientist taps a sample and smiles. They see a new mineral forming slowly over decades that binds the concrete. They publish papers that read like archaeological detective stories. The modern replication is not just nostalgia. Engineers now study Roman techniques to make greener, more durable concrete that could reduce carbon footprints and save coastal infrastructure. This is a different kind of burial. No billionaire bought and shelved it. Time, war, and trade did. The loss was gradual, but the consequence is immediate. We rebuilt ancient skill in white lab coats rather than boardrooms. Next, we shift continents and centuries to blades that cut through myth and steel alike, a metal story that ends with vanished furnaces and lost supply chains. Damascus steel. The smith squints into an orange forge. Hammer falls on an anvil and sparks fly like tiny stars. The air smells of coal and oil. Somewhere far away, a ship lifts a crate of Wootz ingots from a trading vessel. Those ingots are the raw heart of Damascus steel. The metal that made blades both sharp and resilient was not magic. It was a craft. It started with steel ingots produced in India and Sri Lanka. The metal contained unique carbon structures formed by slow cooling and carefully controlled impurities. Medieval swordsmiths in Damascus learned to fold and forge that steel into patterns that shimmered like water. Travelers wrote tales. Arabic smiths described methods. But the recipe traveled like a rumor. Trade routes shifted after wars. Raw materials changed hands. The specific ore sources and kiln techniques that produced true Wootz became harder to reach. By the 18th century, the original method slipped from memory. The swords remained. The forges were quiet. Centuries later, a metallurgist lifts a sample under a scanning electron microscope. He sees microscopic bands and carbides that behave differently from ordinary steel. He reads results out loud. The pattern emerges. Carbon nanotube-like structures and cementite networks explain the legendary toughness. Modern scientists publish papers that try to replicate the process. They approximate, they succeed partially, but the original is rare. The mystery is not only romance, it is practical. The old technique could inspire lighter, stronger alloys for modern engineering. Why did this technology vanish? Not because a billionaire buried it. It vanished because markets shifted, because sources of raw material were cut, because artisanal knowledge depended on narrow networks. The lesson repeats. Some lost technologies are casualties of history. Some are casualties of consolidation and secrecy. Both kinds leave a hole in progress. As we cross from ancient metals to the modern age, we see that the shape of loss changes, but the actors often stay the same. Next, we move into medicine cabinets, where lives were at stake and legal settlements silenced cures. Medical inventions. You sit in a hospital corridor. Fluorescent lights hum. A child sleeps under a thin blanket. Outside the door, a young doctor carries a folder full of hope. Inside that folder is a report from a small study. A device or drug shows promise. It could change a life. Then the phone calls start. This is where medicine meets money. Not all promising ideas fail because they do not work. Some die in courtrooms or vanish after buyouts. One documented mechanism is called pay for delay. Brand pharmaceutical companies pay potential generic competitors to delay entering the market. Courts and regulators have repeatedly found these deals harm patients by keeping cheaper treatments off the shelf. Antitrust suits and government investigations prove it happens. The result is real. Prices remain high and access is limited. There are other forms of legal burial. Patent thickets trap startups in a web of claims. Litigation costs bankrupt innovators. Larger firms buy small inventors for their patents and then shelve the technology as a way to protect legacy products. Court filings and corporate records show this pattern again and again. Inventors end up in bankruptcy hearings instead of on stage, and families lose years of possible treatment while legal teams argue technicalities. Not every delay is greed. Sometimes the pause is ethical. The Tuskegee syphilis study is the darkest example. For decades, public health officials withheld proven treatment to observe disease progression. That was ethical failure and government secrecy. By contrast, the Asilomar Conference shows a different pause. Scientists voluntarily halted risky recombinant DNA work until safety guidelines were created. That pause saved lives. So, the medical graveyard contains many kinds of burials. Some are profit-driven, some are legal byproducts, some are conscious ethical choices. All of them have human costs. The lab is noisy with optimism. Petri dishes line a bench. A postdoctoral researcher watches cells respond to a new compound. The data looks cleaner than anyone expected. A month later, a letter arrives. A large pharmaceutical company offers to buy the startup. The offer reads like salvation. The founders celebrate. Then the calls stop. This pattern repeats across medicine. A promising therapy can be bought and shelved because it threatens a more profitable product. Regulators sometimes catch pay for delay deals, where brand companies pay potential generic competitors to stand down. Courts and watchdogs have challenged these arrangements. The outcomes show the legal system can push back, but not always fast enough for patients who need affordable drugs today. Whistleblowers often become the conscience of the system. Think of a government scientist who goes to a congressional hearing after discovering safety data that was minimized. That happened in the early 2000s, when internal researchers raised alarms about a blockbuster drug. Their testimonies pushed regulators to demand better transparency. When insiders speak out, buried science can resurface. Not every burial is malicious. Patent thickets and legitimate litigation sometimes slow progress as courts sort ownership disputes. The problem is the time it takes. Litigation timelines can stretch for years. Lives do not pause for legal clarity. Families wait. Clinical trials shut down. Funding dries up. There are also darker methods. Corporate espionage and targeted sabotage have been used to undermine rivals. Those tactics are harder to document openly, but historical archives and court records reveal episodes where information was stolen or destroyed. In other cases, executives bought patents to prevent competition. The paper trail shows purchases, redacted reports, and stock transfers that quiet a threat. By the end of this, the picture is clear. Medicine is a field of miracles and markets, both save and stall. Next, we move into one final case that shows how legal battles and corporate power can delay the future we all take for granted. Early television. Open an archive box, and the past speaks in paper. Yellowed ledgers, typewritten contracts, and affidavits that smell faintly of dust and coffee. A clerk slides out a patent application, and you can almost hear the gasp of an inventor whose life depended on those signatures. One of the sharpest examples is Philo Farnsworth. Picture him in a courthouse, thin and sleepless, sketching circuit diagrams on sheets passed across a bench. For years he fought RCA in court. Their lawyers challenged his claims and delayed his commercial rollout. Court transcripts show months of procedural wrangling while rivals built factories. Farnsworth won key rulings, but the victory came late. The technology became entangled in corporate control, and the public waited. Farnsworth invented the electronic television in his early 20s. He filed patents and demonstrated a working system. RCA, led by David Sarnoff, had deep pockets and a vision of controlling the new medium. They offered to buy Farnsworth's patents. He refused. He wanted recognition and fair compensation. What followed was a decade of litigation. RCA claimed their own engineers had invented key components. Patent battles dragged through appeals and depositions, lawyers billed by the hour. Farnsworth struggled to keep his lab funded. Meanwhile, RCA used their resources to influence standards and build manufacturing capacity. They dominated the airwaves even as the courts sorted ownership. By the time Farnsworth won critical rulings, his patents were nearing expiration. The commercial moment had passed. The public got television. But Farnsworth got little of the reward. He spent his later years frustrated and largely forgotten. His story is documented in court records, technical journals, and family accounts. It shows how legal strategy can delay an inventor without killing the invention. The technology survived. The inventor did not thrive. This pattern appears in other industries. Litigation becomes a tool. Delay becomes strategy. When a large firm faces a smaller rival with a superior invention, the courtroom becomes the battlefield. Justice moves slowly. Markets do not wait. So what do these 10 stories teach us? Technology does not rise on merit alone. It rises when capital, infrastructure, law, and culture align. Sometimes that alignment is shaped by those who profit from the status quo. Sometimes it is shaped by accident and history. The lesson is not simple outrage. The lesson is vigilance. When we ask why a technology disappeared, we must look at ledgers and laws and supply chains. We must ask who benefited and who lost. We must demand transparency and resist the easy comfort of conspiracy when the truth is more complex. Some inventions were buried by design. Others were lost to time. All of them show that progress is fragile and that power shapes what we build and what we forget.